So we have a very, very special guest with us today, and it's none other than the leading sports writer at the Northern Echo, none other than Scott Wilson. Scott, how are you doing? Hope you're doing well.
I'm good, thanks, Simon. I hope you're well.
Yep, doing great, thanks. Quite nice and sunny here in Jamaica. What's the weather like in the northeast?
It's actually sunny here. It's cold. It's very cold, but it is a nice sunny day. But I think we're meant to have snow later on this week, so that'll be a little bit different. Can't imagine you got a lot of that.
Wow, interesting. Basically, let's talk about the Northeast. Basically, it's there's been tough times, as we know, with a relegation of clubs in the Northeast. But what's the mood like now, generally speaking, in Tyne and Wear, and by extension, the Northeast, with Middlesbrough back in the Championship under Carrick and Sunderland in the Championship, and of course Newcastle in the Cup final.
Yeah, it feels very, very different actually this last 6 months or so. It feels like a corner's been turned for all three of them, really. I mean, like you say, Newcastle, since the new ownership group came in, just over a year ago, have been completely transformed. It really does feel like a completely different football club now. So, as you rightly say, we've got Wembley at the end of the month, which I think everyone's getting very excited about, and obviously also potentially keeping this Champions League push going and challenging for the top four come the end of the season, which would have been unthinkable at the start of the campaign. So I think whatever happens in the next few months, it's been a really, really good season for Newcastle, and Eddie Howe, has done really, really good things there, and there's a lot to build on for the future. And then obviously in the league below that, we've got Middlesbrough and we've got Sunderland, who both in their own ways are having very, very good seasons. Borough, started fairly poorly under Chris Wilder. He left. Michael Carrick's come in, obviously his first managerial position after a coaching role with Man United, and he's been a real breath of fresh air. He's been fantastic. Borough have been on a great run under him. They're up to third in the league. You would imagine the gap to the top two is probably too big, but you'd be disappointed now if they didn't make the playoffs. And then Sunderland, obviously, after their promotion from League One last season, I think the aim at the start of the season for them would really have just been consolidation, stay up, get something to build on. But it's been better than that, really. They're on the fringe of the playoff race. I think it's going to be tough to do that, especially with the loss of Ross Stewart, their leading goal scorer, who's obviously out for the season. That was a massive blow for them at the end of last month. But even without that, a lot of exciting young players, a lot of exciting loan players, and a really good brand of football to watch, to be perfectly honest. So no, it's after a few years, like you rightly say, of difficult times in the Northeast, it definitely feels a little bit better at the minute.
Yeah, and I'm curious about this point, Scott, as well. Michael Carrick is a Geordie boy, so I'm just curious what the mood like amongst Geordies in the area that he's taken a job at Middlesbrough. Are they happy for him for that opportunity, or it's more like, why Middlesbrough? That's one of the rival clubs close to the area.
The rivals, yeah, I think while he is a Geordie lad and he's still got roots within Newcastle, the fact that he spent so much of his career at Man United, and he kind of describes himself almost as a Man United fan now, really. His kids are all Man United fans. So I think that makes it easier for Newcastle fans to see him at Borough and Borough fans to see a Geordie running their club, if you know what I mean. I think had he spent 20 years playing for Newcastle, I think that would have been different. But I think the perception of Michael Carrick is that all his career has been with Man United, really. So he's probably associated with that more than Newcastle United, even though he is a Geordie.
Yeah, all right, fair enough there. So on the Jamaican side of things, Scott, when was the first time you were made aware of this young lad, Richards, coming to England and, of course, coming to Tyne and Wear?
So a couple of things, really. Certainly since the new ownership group's come in, and certainly since Dan Ashworth's come in as sporting director at Newcastle, there's been a real push to try and sign the best young talent from around the world. And we've kind of been aware of that for the last probably year or so, but certainly 6 to 9 months. So Australia, they've signed an Australian lad, Garon Kuol, who played for Australia at the World Cup. That's been a big target market. South America has been a big target market. And we have known that the Caribbean has been somewhere that they've had scouts and they have been interested in. So I think, those of us who cover the club had kind of been expecting that someone might be coming over at some stage. And then obviously the reports started emerging in Jamaica that that Richards was the one, and so it's kind of come from there really. But as I say, it wasn't a massive surprise in that this is a model that Newcastle are increasingly keen to adopt.
Right, and bearing in mind the persons that are part of the academy system, the Ben Dawson, the Graham Carrick, do you know if they knew much about Richards or any details surrounding him?
I think it'll have been so initially no, I don't think, in that Newcastle's recruitment operation is very separate from the actual coaches on the ground. So the work that would have gone into identifying him, deciding that he was worthy of a trial, putting all of that in place would have been done within the recruitment department, which is headed up, as I say, by Dan Ashworth, who's the sporting director. Obviously, once he comes and he actually comes through the door, then the coaching staff clearly get involved, and they will have a big say on whether a contract's offered or anything like that. But up until that point, no, it's out of their hands, really. It's all done through the, as I say, scouting and recruitment side of it.
Yeah. So when Ben Dawson was basically saying no idea about knowing about Richards, do you think perhaps it was just a lack of communication between the recruitment and the coaching side of things?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of things there. I think firstly that wasn't really a surprise in that they are two separate parts of the organisation. So until the players actually get there, they probably wouldn't know an awful lot about it. I think it's also probably an attempt to play down expectations a little bit because Newcastle do have a number of these types of young players who come through the door over the course of a year. Some we get to know about, some we don't, but it's probably fairly unusual for them to have got the kind of profile that this one's got, if you know what I mean. So I suspect there's a little bit of an attempt to say, look, he's a young lad. We don't know what he's capable of. Let's get him through the door and have a look at him before we start talking him up or saying he's this, that, or the other. So I think there's a bit of that as well, probably.
Yeah, so well, he's going to be there for a fortnight. He was at the West Ham United game in the stands and basically enjoyed the atmosphere.
Yeah.
He's definitely different posts about him enjoying the atmosphere. Have you heard anything like perhaps amongst fans or anything in the club as it relates to the training, how he might be doing, or just the future, really, the next 2 weeks or so?
Yeah, well, I think in terms of them actually starting to get a proper look at him, that probably starts today, I think, because like you say, I think there was a period to allow him to settle in once he came over and everything, let him see St. James's Park, let him have a look at it. And then I suspect this week will be the kind of crunch week where they start putting him through his paces a bit and see what they make of him and kind of what he can do. And as I say, this isn't an unusual circumstance in terms of Newcastle offering this kind of trial and bringing players over. So they'll have a pretty structured plan of what they do, what tests they do, what groups they introduce him to. He clearly won't be training with a first team group, but he'll be with their academy group for a while, I would think, while they suss out and see what they think. And again, quite often this can be the first trial. Sometimes they'll do 2 or 3 before they make a final decision on a player. So I don't expect we'll necessarily get a firm decision in the next couple of weeks, but we might well start to get an indication of what they think of him.
So just to give you a bit of characteristics about Richards, he is big, he's strong, and he's rapid as well, being 6'2". Is that someone and the sort of presence that Geordie fans would appreciate and love, someone of that character?
Yeah, I mean, from the little bits that we've seen, obviously little clips on YouTube and reading reports and stuff, he seems to tick an awful lot of boxes in terms of what you would want for the modern athletic dynamic kind of attacking player. I mean, as I say, Newcastle are starting to go down this route increasingly. They brought, as I say, a forward in from Australia who they've then loaned out to Hearts. They were quite close to signing a young Brazilian in the last transfer window. In the end, that deal didn't go through, but they are wanting to do this more and more. I think get young players, who are making waves in their own kind of part of the world and try and develop them, nurture them, bring them through. Obviously, the ideal is that they become first team players at Newcastle. But then I think part of the thinking with Newcastle is, well, it's a bit like the Chelsea model, isn't it? Whereas if you pack your academy full of those players, even if they don't make it with your club, they're assets that can then be sold on and will make it somewhere, would be the hope.
Right. As you said earlier, Newcastle has done some work, bringing lads from Australia. You mentioned South America as well. can we expect perhaps the Caribbean to be more of a market where the microscope is on them, in a sense, to look at what's out there in terms of talent?
I think it's seen as a relatively untapped market, and a market where English clubs can potentially enjoy quite a lot of success. In that, there are certain markets, South America being a prime example, where Portuguese clubs, Spanish clubs, in particular, have a very strong link there. That for years and years, the best players from that part of the world have gone to Portugal. They've gone to Spain. The academies have tie-ups. It's very hard to find a player in Brazil, say, that half of Europe isn't already aware of. Now, increasingly, that might become the case with the Caribbean, but I think the feeling within the top English clubs at the moment is that maybe there are still the opportunity to get these little, kind of hidden gems, if you like, there before they're on the radar of every other European club and it becomes a bidding war. So I think that's a big part of it. And then obviously, when you've got the likes of, say, Leon Bailey, who is proven that he can do it in the Premier League and making waves and things, then that clearly helps as well, because it shows that the pathway works.
Yeah. And, Scott, Man United, Liverpool, Arsenal, they have the name. So the name by itself basically sells it. Newcastle might not have the trophies in recent years, but it's still a big club that has won trophies. So you'd think that Newcastle is coming to a stage where the name by itself can have that impact on young players coming through. The trophies haven't come yet in recent times, but you'd have to feel that name of the club, the stadium, that this would be a lure, just like the Uniteds and the Arsenals and Liverpool that already have the names and the trophies as well.
Yeah, I think that would be the hope. I mean, listen, the Premier League is a lure in itself to start with, isn't it? I think any Premier League club has a certain amount of pulling power just because they're in the Premier League, and clearly they've got the financial clout that goes along with the Premier League as well. So I think that helps regardless of who you are in the Premier League. But then you're right, there are certain levels within the Premier League, and I think Newcastle are gradually moving from the level that they've been at for probably the most of the last decade to that next level up. Now, obviously, there's an awful long way to get to your Man Cities, your Liverpools, your Man Uniteds, who have been at that level for, since the start of the Premier League, and are turning over the amount of money that they turn over every year. It's very hard to get there, but with the investment that's coming into Newcastle, and with the strides that have already been made onto the pitch under Eddie Howe, they're definitely going in the right direction.
Yep, absolutely brilliant, Scott. Look, thank you very much for your time. Really, really appreciate it. If you do get the chance,
all right, mate,
to watch or catch up with Whisper, do let us know.
Yeah, I will definitely. And by the same token, if you if you find out anything, or if you got anything, drop me a line. It'd be good to hook up.
Absolutely brilliant, Scott. Thank you very much for your time. Really,
all right,
really.
mate, no problem.
All right.
Bye.